World War I, a forgotten nightmare in human history. The supposed war to end all wars ended nothing, but changed everything. Around 70 million individuals participated in World War I. 10 million never came home, and over 7 million civilians lost their lives in the crossfire. Entire generations of young men in both France and Germany were nearly wiped out, leading to an economic and social crisis that sent Germany down the path of ultimate madness, and the cycle of violence began again. If World War I could be summed up in one word, it would be misery. Horrific and unnecessary misery. There was no glory to be had, no clear-cut heroes and villains, only casualties, as the privileged leadership on both sides sent wave after wave of soldiers against the brick wall that was no man's land, hoping to break the stalemate that had endured for years. It is in these trenches and across no man's land that we find the backdrop for our first historical review, the 2019 epic war film, 1917, by filmmaker Sam Mendes.
Stop, Tim. Stop the video. Stop.
Oh, come on. That was a good take. Who said that?
I did.
Oh, yay. It's the YouTube comment section, my more or less co-host, here to point out little historical tidbits we missed. What do you want? We haven't even shown the title card yet.
I just finished a very nice PragerU video on slavery, and I noticed you were about to praise a film whose historical premise is completely absurd. I felt compelled to voice my unsolicited opinion on it. The very premise of 1917 is ahistorical. It's completely unrealistic, and it's riddled with anachronisms, including an egregious one with a tank.
Oh no, don't worry. We'll get to the tank. And it is true that I have high praise for 1917, as I recommend it as a great historical film. Let me restart the video real quick. To catch everyone up, 1917 tells the story of two British soldiers in World War I, who are tasked with delivering critical orders to the isolated 2nd Battalion of the Devonshire Regiment, calling off an upcoming attack as it is actually a trap by the Germans. The two soldiers, one of whom has a brother in the 2nd Battalion, must race against time and the dangers of no man's land to prevent the disaster from happening. Shenanigans follow. As radios at the time were considered unreliable for frontline work, and portable versions wouldn't be invented for at least 2 decades, armies relied primarily on wired telegraph lines to send orders. If those were not available, or in the case of the film, cut by the Germans, runners were used to physically deliver those messages, as had been done for centuries.
But runners during World War I typically only operated within a few hundred yards, not several kilometers as shown in the film. If longer distance messages were required, the British often used carrier pigeons or even dropped message bars from passing aircraft. As the film clearly shows, the British did have access to air support, so why didn't they utilize that to drop a message to the 2nd Battalion?
Great question, and that was primarily a cinematic decision by filmmaker Sam Mendes. Mendes' grandfather, Alfred Mendes, who served as a runner for the 1st Battalion Rifle Brigade, was the main inspiration for the film. Sam Mendes wanted to honor his grandfather and bring his stories to the big screen, but knew a simple runner mission wouldn't make for a very compelling war epic. So the scope was enlarged considerably to showcase World War I in Europe as the hellish landscape it was, and I think he did a great job of it. Similar to past films like Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, Mendes managed to turn the whole film into a giant one-take, with very few obvious cuts, and it works brilliantly. You can actually see Mendes experimenting with this style of filmmaking in the opening of his previous film, Spectre.
You're not going to defend Spectre, are you?
Oh, hell no. No, that was the only good part of the film.
Oh, good. I thought you were going to defend using an aging Monica Bellucci as a Bond girl.
Circling back to the historical premise, the timing of the film's events are very close to reality, as, taking place in April 1917, this would have immediately followed the completion of Operation Alberich, where German forces strategically withdrew to the recently completed Nuremberg Line, which was 25 miles shorter and much more easily defendable. Any attacks from the British and Allied forces would result in higher casualties, while the German leadership explored methods of breaking the stalemate of trench warfare that had been in place since 1914. Indeed, the film 1917 captures trench warfare very well, albeit in a condensed form.
Right, as real trench networks had the field hospitals way further back than what is portrayed in the film, which is showing it right next to the trenches. Otherwise, they'd be prime targets for artillery strikes. And then there's that tank.
We'll get to the tank. We need to talk about the trenches first. Trench warfare was the result of when pre-war thinking meets modern technology. In the opening months of the war, nations utilized old Napoleonic style of combat by massing armies and throwing them at each other on the great fields of battle. Since the previous main conflict decades earlier, the military on both sides adopted new weapons making such tactics completely useless, such as the Maxim machine gun and modern artillery utilizing the French hydro-pneumatic recoil system. Both inventions rapidly and accurately laid down devastating fields of fire across the battlefield, decimating everything and everyone within range, forcing all sides to dig in and hunker down in trenches, while leadership tried to find a solution to break the stalemate. For years, both sides experimented with new technology, including aircraft, tanks, and even body armor, each with varying degrees of success, and during that time, the trenches became larger, more elaborate, and we really see that come to life in 1917. Throughout the film, we see the protagonist navigate sophisticated and detailed trenches, both British and German, and it's a fairly good representation including references to streets, as the British often designated rows of trenches as streets, and makeshift road signs for ease of use and navigation. We even see a barbershop setup, which was an actual thing in the trenches. This isn't to say trench life was easy, as it was absolutely miserable, as this is where the term trench foot comes from.
Actually, trench foot was first discovered in 1812 in Russia.
Someone's been on Wikipedia, and while that is correct, the term was first coined during World War I, as was the implementation of preventative maintenance. Another issue in the trenches were the rats. Rats thrived in the trenches, feeding on unfinished rations and even the dead, and often reproduced faster than soldiers could kill them since they were forbidden to shoot them. They had to resort to using their bayonets. Rats also brought disease. Lots and lots of disease, and that's on top of the other illnesses rampant in the trenches. In any case, Mendes faithfully showcases the intricacies as well as the insanity in the trenches. But this pales in comparison to what was to be shown next: No Man's Land. There really isn't much to say here, as it's pretty obvious why it's called No Man's Land, and Mendes captures it pretty well. Large holes caused by artillery strikes to where you could get stuck in them, barbed wire everywhere, practically making it a maze, and not so much as any plant life anywhere in sight. Farmers in France are still digging out spent artillery shells from those fields to this day.
There seems to be an excessive amount of bodies out there, a bit much if you ask me.
It's true that there is debate on if the amount of bodies was excessive to the point where some argue the film is actually a horror film, but I firmly believe Mendes gets his point across. World War I was complete misery while telling the epic version of the stories his grandfather had told him as a child. Mendes certainly does take creative liberty. Had this been more true to historical events, our protagonist would have encountered snipers and machine gun nests left behind by the Germans as part of Operation Albrecht, and the film would have been a lot shorter. But it's still a great story that respects the time period it's representing. And we could spend hours going over the little pedantic historical inaccuracies that make Armchair General Reddit pages squeal with collective orgasmic delight, but ultimately none of them are really of any consequence, so we'll skip all those little details, save for one.
The tank?
The tank. Let me cue it up for you. And there it is. It's all yours.
Thank you. Shown here is the Mark IV tank, which didn't go into actual service until the next month in May 1917. What should have been shown was the Mark I, which did see first use at the Battle of the Somme in September 1916, a few months prior to the events of the film. That was it.
Oh, okay. Well, very interesting and worth the wait. Doesn't change anything about the film, but thank you all the same.
Hey, want to know a fun fact about World War I tanks?
Always.
World War I tanks didn't have a top-mounted turret like we see in conventional tanks like the M4 Sherman, the M1 Abrams, or the Soviet T-34. Instead, they had side-mounted armament pods, or sponsons.
Oh, that is interesting.
I'm not done. There are two types of tank designations at this time, male and female. Female tanks sported all machine guns, whereas male tanks spotted a 6-pound Hotchkiss gun on each sponson. Get it?
Oh, yeah, I get it. Males have the big guns.
They sure do.
Indeed. Very juvenile.
The cannons are the tank's penis.
I get it. You've been waiting the whole time to tell us that, haven't you?
Yes, sir. I think it's time we wrap this video up.
Couldn't agree more. 1917 is an excellent film, far exceeding my expectations, and is a great watch for both history buffs and the general audience alike. This is clearly Mendes' passion project, and it shows with the whole film being shot and edited as if it's a one take, giving the audience a constant state of dread and misery, which sums up life in the trenches pretty succinctly. In the tradition of Master and Commander as well as Gladiator, 1917 tells a great fictional story set against the backdrop of a very real event, and respecting it in the process. I do recommend this one if you haven't seen it already. And that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed our first episode of Madcap History Reviews.
Like and subscribe to be notified of our next video. Bye!
The f*** you mean earlier about Monica Bellucci?
Dude, she's old.
She was like 48, 49 when they filmed Spectre. That's not old. Have you seen her now? She's 57 and looks amazing.
That's old in Hollywood. Most females in Hollywood after age 35 are cast as grandmas.
That's ageist and horrible. Even Daniel Craig found the manufactured controversy to be complete bollocks.
That may be, but wait a minute. Why did the citation pop-up appear during the credits? Are we still recording?
Hang on.